Hello YouTube. Before we get involved in anything technical, I thought we'd have a bit of a chat because, well, let's face it, if you're going to invest the time and trouble into something like this, you pretty much want to be clear on why you're doing it and what the benefits could be. And a lot of people haven't really got that much of a clue about the computers that they're using. They feel that the computer is in more control of their destiny than they are, and that's not a good situation. Consequently, when things go wrong, they don't feel that they're empowered enough to be able to put things right. And when you think that a lot of these issues are software related, people take their computers along to these shops and pay a lot of money for something that's relatively easy to fix usually, or at least we could give them the power to fix them themselves. And that's pretty much one of the things I'm intending on here. The point of the video is to give you the ability to make those decisions and learn to install a Linux operating system and getting it into a working state yourself. It is going to be a bit of a technical video and not a technical video, so to speak. So if you're a hard-on techie that knows about Linux, save your sanity, click away now. I'm also aware that in my earlier videos, when I tried to explain Linux and all the rest of it, I attempted to go all really low level and coochie-coo about things, and on playback it didn't work. So if I explain something and you don't understand it, you're just going to have to rewind a bit, repeat it, and if you still don't understand it, then you're going to have to ask questions and we'll deal with it separately. But yeah, it is a bit of a learning curve, but you know, that comes with the territory. We're going to start with the question of why learn Linux. And a lot of people are going to have their agreements and disagreements with what I'm saying here. It's natural. So be prepared to encounter techies with different experiences and different loyalties who will all be saying different things and will have a different take on the situation. It's up to you to make your choices and determine for yourself who you're going to believe and what action you're going to take. I'm not trying to strong arm you here, this is just my way of looking at things. You're perfectly free to disagree. Before I get into some of these things, I'm going to tell you a little story about Ubuntu. Now, it started that they had 3 versions. One for the servers, one for the desktops, and another one for the netbooks, as they were at the time. The reason that there was a separate version for the netbooks is because they typically had a smaller screen size and they didn't have the power of the desktops. So Ubuntu was tuned for those. When touchscreens started to come in, you know, tablets, I mean, touchscreens themselves have been with us for a long time, but when tablets came in, the decision was made by the Ubuntu team to go to an interface called Unity, which was very touch orientated. But the long story short is that that upset people who were still using keyboards and mice, because, you know, the icons were difficult. You know, I hated it. It's a very Marmite operating system. You either love it or you hate it, the Unity interface. So the net result is, fortunately for Linux users, there are other distributions, so people could switch who didn't like Unity. But it basically split the community down the middle, very Marmitey. So you want to remember this. This happened, I think, last year. But remember this drive to the touch interface basically splitting the community. That's what happened, because we're going to encounter it again. Okay, so let's take a current look at the situation with Microsoft Windows. XP's time is pretty much nigh. How much time it's got left on the clock, I don't know, but it's coming to an end. Not only have Microsoft made it a bit harder to put a fresh installation of XP on a computer, you've got to have it up to Service Pack 3 before it will talk to Microsoft for any more updates, for example. But it's getting to the stage now where some of the major software manufacturers will not produce their wares for XP anymore. And when that happens, it's happening more slowly with XP than any of their earlier operating systems, but it's the same MO. New software comes out and it doesn't come out on XP, so you're left with no option but to change operating systems to migrate up. And that's really the question. What are you migrating up to? At the minute it's Windows 7, but we're approaching October 2012, and Windows 8 is pretty much going to be out there. Now, if you hark back to what I said about Ubuntu and Unity, that's what Microsoft are doing with the Windows 8. It's called Metro, and it again is a very Marmite system. You either love it or you hate it. And they pretty much did it for the same reasons, for touch interface. And it could hack off a lot of desktop users who still use a keyboard and mouse. There have been a few bits and pieces given way by Microsoft because of the feedback that's come back from earlier reviewers, but who knows what it's going to do. So business are fine. I mean, business will typically be running their own internal authentication and licensing servers, so they will be able to make new Windows 7 installations and carry on and ride out whatever happens with Windows 8. But for the consumer, you and I, things are a bit different. Microsoft pretty much are in a bit of a bind. I think it was a couple of years ago that their stocks were actually downgraded to normal because the markets were a bit scared that they weren't actually going to be able to make any new headway into the industry and be left behind. Their main products are Microsoft Windows and Microsoft Office. And incidentally, in case you're thinking about it, the new version of Microsoft Office is also Metro. Yeah. It's also cloud, but I'll come on to that again in a minute. So their stocks were downgraded. They've also, recent news is that they've posted the first ever loss in their history, 26-year history. And that's because Bill Gates hasn't actually been at the head of Microsoft for more than a decade. It's been a guy by the name of Steve Ballmer. And the markets are a bit jittery, to put it mildly. So who knows what's going to happen to Microsoft. They have made a couple of inroads, things like Kinect and other things like that in the gaming sphere, and they've bought a lot of companies, and I think what's caused their loss this time is that they have put so much money into other companies that haven't yet turned a profit for them. Their search engine market foray, called Bing, has fallen flat on its face. Well, flat on its face, it certainly hasn't come anywhere close to touching Google's dominance. And so we're going to have to see what happens. But Microsoft are not the strong, stable company that they once were. And when your computer goes wrong and you go to a shop to buy a new one, pretty much after the end of the year, I think you're going to be stuck with Windows 8. You're not going to have much of a choice. Microsoft pull a few tricks. Like, this is my netbook, my Toshiba NB200. Again, as you can see, it's got quite a bit of a smaller screen. So the traditional, what I really loved what Ubuntu did with the version for netbooks pre-Unity, because it made better use of the screen, and I got on with that quite well. Whereas Unity, I'm really hating. But when I bought this, it pretty much came with Windows, with Microsoft Windows XP on it. So I called Toshiba and said, look, I don't plan on using Windows XP, so why should I pay for the license? They said, and this was in a telephone call, so I don't actually have a record of it, so you're going to have to take my word for it, that what Microsoft did was they subsidized the cost. They subsidized the cost of the NB200 to the degree it was a sort of a bit of a deal, which is why you didn't see any NB200s come out with Linux, because Microsoft had given them money, they'd subsidized it. So if I wanted one of these without Windows on it, I would end up paying more because I'd have lost the subsidy. So I wound up getting it with Windows on it and just wiped the thing. It didn't actually cost me any money, so that's what Microsoft did. and I don't know to what extent they're still doing it, but if Microsoft are paying manufacturers to put Windows on machines instead of the manufacturers having to pay to have Microsoft licenses for the machines, then Microsoft effectively have some leeway over the manufacturers to say, right, you install Linux on your machines and offer it to the customers, and that's it, our deal is done, you pay full whack. And when you think about something like that, it's easy to see why many manufacturers buckle and why your choice in the shops is limited. So pretty much when you walk into a shop, all you're going to be able to get is Windows 8. Microsoft have got to make the money, they've got to make the inroads, they've got to try and force people over to Metro, so I don't think that they'll even be offering Windows 7 in the shops for very much longer. Once Windows 8 is out, that's it. So that's going to be one of the brick walls that you're about to hit. That's how I see it playing out. When your current machine dies, you go for another one, you're going to have no option. That's the way I see it happening. There's also the cloud. And this includes the latest version of Microsoft Office that's just about to be released. It's very cloud orientated, and Microsoft want you to put your data in the cloud. They don't want you to store it on your local machine anymore, they want it in the cloud. Now that has a number of impacts. Firstly, if you don't have an internet connection, say you're on holiday, which is what I do with a netbook, take it on holiday in a caravan or something like that. If you don't have a connection to the internet, how are you going to get at the cloud to get at your documents? Not only that, but yeah, the cloud has its uses, and we'll be coming onto the cloud later on. But this is where they're pushing. Cloud services are going to cost. Who's going to pay for that? Who's going to pay for the storage? The cynic in me says that this is Microsoft trying to get people hooked on a subscription service, which is going to net them ongoing money. And we're in a recession. People aren't going to want to do that. And another one, bandwidth. Our bandwidth, I think that a lot more of us are hitting more bandwidth usage than we used to. The bandwidth caps are still relatively tight, but we're still consuming a lot of media. And also a lot of houses are starting to go over to or investigate the services which deliver films over the broadband connection. Now if you're with someone like BT and your connection is with them, then they may be in a position to make your subscription exempt from your broadband allowance. But for a lot of us, Microsoft probably aren't going to have those deals. So the more that we deal with our documents online, the more of our usage we're going to be using, and that's going to take us closer to our caps. Not only that, but even if you do have a nice solid connection, you can have more problems. Well, you know what the internet's like at rush periods. I remember during some disasters we couldn't get access all day. When the Twin Towers went down, I was in Germany. I wanted to get to the BBC News sites. I couldn't do it. We just could not get any data out of the building. Now, for that entire day, if the company's information had been on somebody else's cloud, we wouldn't have been able to get to it. We would have been completely stuck. So there's a lot more, there's been a saying going around these last few months in the IT circles that if a manager is considering to go over to cloud services, the first people they need to talk with is their legal department before they even talk with their techies, because there's an awful lot going on here. When you store stuff in the cloud, how do you know what server is being kept on, which country that server is in? Let's say, for example, you're in New Zealand, where it's perfectly legal to rip a DVD to a file, and then you store that in the cloud. But the cloud server happens to be stored in a country where that's illegal. You're then committing an offence, principally. And it's things like that that really need to be sorted out. And it's woolly things like that that can see all sorts of things happen. But there you go. So, to conclude this section, it's not going to be long before consumers, you and I, are going to be left with no other choice that when we walk into a shop, it's going to be Windows 8. and Windows 8 is a radical change of operating system. Very Marmite. If you love it, great, you'll have no problem. But if you hate it, what's your alternative going to be? You're pretty much only going to have one. Well, two. If you're rich, you can buy Apple. If you're not rich, you're going to need to go to an alternative like Linux if you can't get a hold of a copy of Windows 7. Look, at the end of the day, the ability to take a computer and load an operating system on it is a very useful skill to have. And with Windows, it looks like being more difficult as the years go on. So, if you've got a spare machine knocking around and there's no data on it that you want, what have you got to lose? See you in part 2.